Aloha and good afternoon. Thanks for joining us on this extended stream of See It Now. We are listening into a live press conference with Honolulu Police. Arthur Joe Logan is now speaking at the podium. Let's go ahead and send it to him live.
On two of our officers who were critically injured. Last Thursday, one of our officers was struck in the head with a heavy metal object before the suspect stole the officer's car and drove off. Other officers were able to locate and follow the suspect until the vehicle was stopped and the driver was arrested. The officer has since been released from the hospital and is continuing to recover at home. Shortly before midnight on Sunday night, an officer who was directing traffic for a motor vehicle collision in the H3 tunnel was hurt when he was struck and pinned between his vehicles. The officer remains hospitalized with extensive injuries, and the investigation is ongoing. His path to recovery will be a long one, and we continue to support both the officers and their families during this difficult time. At this time, I'd like to talk about traffic safety. Last Wednesday, a family lost a 16-year-old daughter when she was killed while crossing the street to go to school. After initially fleeing the crash scene, the driver turned himself into HPD. Sarah's family and friends, though still in shock and grief, have reached out to HPD and others. They want her death to be a sobering reminder of the frailty of life and how all of us have a shared responsibility in keeping Oahu's roads safe. Along with Sarah's family, HPD is asking everyone to look out for each other, whether you're operating a motor vehicle, a moped, riding a bicycle, or crossing the street. Focus on what you're doing and avoid distractions. Drivers, please slow down and allow extra time to get where you're going. Moped operators and bicyclists, please follow the laws and watch out for the vehicles. For pedestrians, use crosswalks when you can, and try to make eye contact with drivers. Since January 1st, HPD traffic investigators have responded to 10 traffic fatalities and 12 critical incidents. Let's try to keep this number down and get everyone home safely. I now open up to your questions.
In regards to a situation where you have a traffic stop, there are laws on the books, as I understand, how drivers are supposed to behave when they are approaching and see lights flashing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the move over law was passed in 2012 after two other officers were killed, unfortunately, by drivers. And so what we're asking is to move one lane over to create a buffer zone between the traffic and the officer that's on the shoulder of the road or in a traffic lane. If there's no lane to move over, then to slow down to an appropriate speed to allow you a safe passage so that the officer's safety and the other people that are involved in, say, the investigation of an accident or a traffic citation or that, whatever the officer is pulled off to the side for or in the road for, that you provide safety for all of them that are there. So that's what we're asking for, the move over law.
Chief, are police seeing an increase in attacks on officers like the one involving the hammer out in Lydale?
So we have seen, I think, these two incidents were 2 of 8 this year of 2023. We've had probably 80 to 90 assault on officers in a given year, so that's about the average. And any one of those is too high.
Chief, do you know if body camera footage is being reviewed in the H3 incident? Officer body cam footage?
I believe that's part of the investigation. They're looking at all of those things, yes.
Chief, when officers are injured in the line of duty or assaulted, are there any internal investigations that go on to see if policies were followed or anything like that?
Yes, anytime, in all types of investigations, there are policies and procedures that are being looked at, whether we want to update our policies to correct things that may be deficient, or if we want to improve the policy, or the policy is whole and sound, and so we're verifying that. But in the event that the officers are injured, or there's a multiple of things that are occurring at the same time through investigation to determine the cause. and how can we can best keep our officers safe.
I know both officers that you mentioned at one time or now were listed in critical condition. Can you update us on the exact condition of the officers?
So I know the one officer is released from the hospital, is recovering, so I don't believe he's no longer in critical condition. The officer still in the hospital recovering, is at least in serious condition and still going through recovery.
Is there a criminal investigation or a traffic investigation? What would you call the traffic investigation if the officer got hit while he was on duty?
It's a motor vehicle collision involving the car and a pedestrian, so that accident or collision investigation is still ongoing.
Chief, is it too early to say whether that officer in the H3 will have use of his both legs?
We're still investigating, and he's still recovering, so that'll pan out as we know more in the future.
Was the motorist taken in at all in the H3 incident?
No, he was cooperative at the scene. He was interviewed, and I believe a statement was taken from him at the scene.
Chief, were you aware of a officer injured in this morning's Macy's burglary at all?
I understand that there may have been an officer that involved in the investigation, looking for the suspect in the roof of Macy's, may have been injured, but I think he refused any type of treatment at the scene.
Chief, just wrapping up for me, in the H3 incident, we heard that there was two cars involved, one that was stopped and the other car that swerved. We're hearing that it might have been that car that was driving, when he swerved, hit the car that was stopped, and that car hit the officer. Is that still part of the investigation? Who exactly hit the officer?
Yeah, all that is part of the investigation. That's true.
Not
So,
clear at this time.
not clear at this time. So we'll know more as we pursue this investigation. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, Will, you just heard a live news conference with Honolulu Police Chief Arthur Joe Logan. Now, there was a lot to unpack from this news conference. They talked on 3 separate issues, one of them being the latest in the condition of the officers who were injured in
Yes.
2 recent incidents, one of them having started in Laie, snaked through Wahiawa, central Oahu, all the way through town. We have some details on that. And we also have details on the second case in which the officer was injured after responding to some sort of traffic incident on the H3 freeway. Now, in addition to that, Arthur Joe Logan also spoke on the latest in the Sarah Yara investigation with she was, of course, the young teen who was
Yes.
struck and killed outside of McKinley High School. Essentially, all of this is still under investigation, but it was still nice to hear from police for them to come out on camera and say, this is what we're tracking right now. These are the latest updates in that. And so for more on this, I'm going to turn over to Emily. Emily, let's briefly talk about the Laie incident and how that unfolded and what we heard Police Chief Logan tell us just now.
Yeah, so the new update is that Honolulu Police Chief said that that officer that was injured, he has now been released from the hospital and is recovering at home. So that's some good news out of that story. Just a reminder of what Dylan was saying. He was saying that that was the officer that was hit with a metal object down in Laie by the suspect, and the suspect then proceeded to allegedly steal his vehicle and take it all the way to Iolani Palace, where he was arrested.
And this is actually a map that one of our graphics members made. As you can see there, it started in the early morning hours
Yeah.
around 5 a.m. in Laie, went all the way through the North Shore, and then wrapped its way around through to Honolulu. And earlier that day, we got some video of the strange interaction between a witness and police, and it was just very unclear. And this is a look at the alleged suspect there. So a lot of details to follow in this case as well. Going over to the H3 story
Yes.
now. Emily, recap that for us, would you?
So one of the things that Joe Logan did say that he is going to have a long road to recovery in that case. From our police sources, we're hearing that he suffered some serious injuries to both of his legs and was last listed in critical condition. That officer has since had an emergency surgery on Monday. But again, Logan did say that he is going to have a long road to recovery. And at least, he doesn't know exactly what his condition is, but he did say at least he's in serious condition.
And one thing to note with this story, this prompted Captain Logan to basically, wrong video there, folks. This prompted Captain Logan to remind the public about Hawaii's move over law. Now, this law has been in place since 2012. It's a law that requires drivers to essentially, as self-explanatory, move over when you see something on the side of the road there in terms of emergency vehicles and whatnot. And that law went into effect in 2012 after HPD officers Garrett Davis and Eric Fontes were killed in the line of duty responding to separate incidents. So again, if you're on the freeway, if you're on a road and you see an officer in the shoulder lane, you are required to move over to the next lane. And if the open lane is not essentially available, slow down to a reasonable speed. We definitely want to make sure that everyone stays safe out there on the road. Now, the last incident that Captain Logan spoke about was this heartbreaking incident right here. This was the scene outside of McKinley High School in the days that followed Sarah Yara's death. It's an absolutely heartbreaking story.
Yeah, and that is 16-year-old Sarah Yara. She was crossing the street in a marked crosswalk on Kapiolani Boulevard when she was hit. The driver had left the scene and fled, so it was a hit and run, but that suspect later turned themselves in. The family is really just taking this heartbreaking incident and trying to get some action out of it, talking to police, working with them to raise awareness of the importance of drivers slowing down, for pedestrians too. Like, when you're crossing the street, make sure you look both ways, make eye contact with the driver. Walk in marked crosswalks is a super important tip too. And the police were just giving some other information about how many of these responses they've been to so far. And there have been 10 traffic fatalities so far this year. And they have also responded to 12 critical crashes. So that just goes to show, like, 10 lives were lost already this year due to traffic incidents and 12 critical injuries. So that is a high number, you know.
And another thing to note here, we did get the image of the suspect there in that hit and run crash, and we actually ran a story on it, and his traffic record is long. There is, I believe it was nearly 200, a little bit less than that, traffic infractions. And so we've been doing stories and follow-ups into what can be done to prevent these drivers. He was driving without a license, allegedly, at the time, at least on his record, he has that. What can be done to prevent these people from getting back on the roads? And so our Daryl Huff has been looking extensively into that story. And another thing that Captain Logan said was that Sarah Yara's family wanted her death to be a sobering reminder of the fragility of life. And so it was a heartbreaking scene in the days that followed as family members, community members, and of course her classmates. She was on her way to school. Yeah. They all came together for her memorial. And it's a heartbreaking scene out there. You can see the emotion on her parents' face there, and it's definitely a loss that was felt throughout the community. And so that is kind of a recap of what we just heard from Honolulu Police. We will be working to wrap all of this and bring it to you first at 4 on KHNL. Our Eddie Dowd was there at the press conference, and you will be hearing from him in our 4 o'clock hour on KHNL. So for now, that's going to do it for us here. I'm Dylan Anchetta alongside Emily Cristobal. Thanks for watching.